Okay, so I'm just going to do a run through of the midterm test. So you've done all of your training tutorials, and the midterm test is just you putting all those bits of knowledge together. So I'm just going to walk through how you can do that. And so what I've got is the midterm test that is running, and then as well I have my Neptune student that's up, so I can kind of see my progress as I go along. So I'm just going to work through and hit all the milestones for you so you can see how you can do that. Okay, so first group of milestones, I guess 1 through 4, is really just dealing with the emergency generator and some of the emergency systems. So let's take a look at emergency generator. Okay, so first thing I see is that I have a number of alarms on my page, so I'm going to start solving those alarms. So lube oil is low, so I'm going to add lube oil. My service tank is high, so I'm going to drain a little bit of oil from that tank. My cooling water in this case looks low, so I'm going to add some cooling water. And this emergency generator day tank, I'm not going to be able to solve until I turn on the machine. So I'm going to leave that one alone. And I can see as I start solving these alarms, I'm going to make sure that I close off the drain so that I stabilize those levels. Close off the fill so that that guy is stable. And then in a few moments here, I'll turn off the supply for the lube oil. Okay, good. So I've kind of met my minimum levels for lube oil, and then I'll turn off my fill. Okay, so I should be able to start my generator. I have sufficient voltage to get the generator started, so I'm going to attempt to start it. Generator is going to run around 1,800 RPM, so I'm just waiting for that to ramp up, and then we will see that it hopefully stays running. In the meantime, with this pump turned on now, you can see that our day tank is starting to increase in value, and once it hits, I think at least 20 as its level, then that will clear, and so we're trending towards that. We are stabilized now, a little bit below 1800 RPM, but within that range, so I think we are up and running. Ultimately, we'd like to turn this generator into auto. However, we're not able to do that just yet. There's a couple things we're missing. So first is how the breakers get handled at the emergency generator. So first thing we want to do is disable the ability for electricity to be backfed through the rest of the plant. And as well, we want to set the breaker control to auto so that it can automatically engage or disengage the breaker for the emergency generator to the electrical system. Okay, so we've done that. We then need to energize our generator. Okay, so right now we don't have any voltage or frequency showing, so we're going to turn on our voltage control, and we're going to adjust that value so that we get about 440 volt coming out. And we take a look at our frequency and we notice that it's a little bit low, so we can use our governor to raise that frequency, speed up the machine, and we want to try to get it pretty close to 60. Okay, so that's pretty good, and at this point we're able to put our generator into auto, and because we'd enabled the breakers to automatically open and close, then they're going to automatically close for me in just a second here. Okay, so breaker is in, and we can see that we've got our first check mark. The emergency generator is done. So the emergency generator is now supplying electricity up through the emergency bus bar to panel number 7.3. And so it then powers up all of these feeder panels for other systems inside of the plant. So I'm going to turn on the individual breakers so each of those systems can access my emergency power. I also have a pathway down here that we need to turn on the breaker to the emergency transformer. And now I'm able to power these systems and turn on the breakers here. In addition, I also have a 24-volt system that we need to turn on the breakers as well too. So that should allow me to get my mark for my emergency switchboard system in there. So everything powered up, and I've got my mark for that. Okay, so now that I have electricity, I want to prioritize anything that's going to be an immediate safety concern. So I have a few systems that I want to tackle. Okay, first one is going to be my seawater system, and I want to turn on my emergency fire pump. Okay, so that's the first system, so that pressurizes all of the sprinkler lines inside of my plant. So if I do have a fire, then I can hope to put it out with water being sprayed. I also want to prioritize ventilation. So I have a supply and exhaust fan, number 2. I also have to follow through this pathway to 71. I do need to turn on a secondary breaker for those fans. So fan number 2 on number 71. And then that allows me to start some ventilation. Final thing that I want to do from an emergency system perspective is I want to set up, if I have any water leaks or oily water, I want to make sure that it's handled correctly and I don't have any flooding or leaks inside of my plant. So I have these collection points for water, and I want to move them to a collection tank, one sort of communal collection tank, the dirty bilge water tank. So here's my dirty bilge water tank, and I'm going to open up the valve, the inlet valve for the dirty bilge water tank. And then if I turn this pump control into auto, it's going to automatically sense the levels in these collection points and will turn on the pump and open up valves so that it can start draining. I don't have my mark just yet. I'll get that in a few seconds once these levels have dropped enough. So I'm going to move on to number 4, the emergency generator check, and we'll take a look at number 3. We'll see that eliminate in a little bit. So now that I have my emergency generator running, what I'm going to hope is that everything is running okay. So if we take a look at my system, I still have this one alarm. However, it's going to be hopefully able to clear itself in a few moments here. So I think 20 for that level, and it should clear. In addition, I don't see any other alarms on this page, so I think everything looks good. I'm going to do another scan here at number 70, and if I look at the output from my generator, I can see that now that I've put it under load, it's dropped in its frequency. So when I consumed power from all of these systems that have now been energized, it's put a load on my generator, and it's causing it to slow down a little bit to try to run underneath that load. So I'm going to raise my governor a little bit. And I want to bring it back up to 60. So raise, raise, raise. And that looks like it should be pretty good. Okay, and so from time to time, the emergency generator isn't all that good about adjusting itself. So if we're running off the emergency generator, we may want to go back and check to make sure it's running effectively. Okay, so we just accomplished our emergency generator check, and then we can now move on to going and using the emergency generator for a few systems. And these systems are going to help us get our diesel generator 1 and 2 running. So let's go take a look at our emergency panel for a second. So in our emergency panel, we have a couple devices that we can use. Our emergency air compressor. We have our auxiliary seawater pump. And then things like our diesel generator priming pump, our diesel generator preheaters, and we're going to use those in order to start all the systems needed to start up our diesel generator. Okay, so let's start. We'll start with emergency air first out of our list. And our emergency air system is over here at 5.9. And we have this emergency air compressor. Okay, so we'll want to turn them on. Before we do that, we'll want to make sure we have a pathway open to our receiver. And we'll open up our pathway all the way to the diesel generators. We can turn on our emergency air compressor, and we should start to see pressure starting to build in our air system. In order for this emergency air receiver to not overpressurize, we want to make sure that the air compressor can turn itself off. So we'll go to do that by switching the control of this to remote. And on our panel directory 102, we're going to turn our emergency air compressor into auto. Sometimes that needs to build a little pressure before the check mark comes. So we'll take a look at that in a little moment to see that hopefully the light has come back on. Okay. In the meantime, I think at this point I'm going to skip ahead to number 7. There's a bit of a time delay sometimes on that one. Oh, we just saw the emergency air come up. So diesel generator pre-start setup. So some of the things that I have to do in my pre-start for this is going to be to turn on the preheaters so that I can try to pre-warm this machine as much as possible. So I'm going to change my set point to 75, and I'm going to set my preheater into auto. Okay. Because I have 2 generators, I'm going to kind of duplicate both of my actions here for diesel generator 1 and 2. So generator 1, preheater on. Now I'm on generator 2. I'm going to make sure set point 75 and turn on my preheater. All right, back to 1. I'm going to scan to make sure my freshwater system doesn't have any other alarms in it, so my expansion tank level is okay, and adjust as needed. Same thing over here on number 2. Looks okay to me. Next thing that I want to look at is my lube oil. So my lube oil is a little low on generator number 1, so I'm going to add lube oil. Okay, so my alarm has just cleared, and I'll give it a little bit more. Okay, just continue that process, repeat the action on the other one. So check my level and top it up as needed. Okay, so back to number 1, I want to now start circulating lube oil. So I've got a set of filters, so I'm going to pick one filter to use, and I'm going to turn my pump into auto. And I will repeat that process for diesel generator number 2. I'm going to open up a filter, and I'm going to turn on my pump into auto. Last thing that I'm going to have to do is set up my fuel system for my diesel generators. So both diesel generators are going to draw from tank number, the diesel oil service tank on page number 5. So I'm going to start at my tank and work my way across to the generators. Before I'm going to use my fuel, I want to make sure that it's not contaminated, and I'm going to do that by opening up the drain and ensuring that I have 100% oil that's leaving. Okay, so looks like I have 100% oil. I'm going to stop draining. So I've done my contamination check, and then I'm going to start opening up my pathways to my diesel generators. So open up my pathways. So here on diesel generator number 1, I've got a valve to open. I want to make sure that this valve is in the position so it's drawing from my tank number, or page number 5. And then I'm going to open up a filter. And I'm going to repeat the same process on number 2. Open up the main shutoff valve, and then I'm going to have one fuel filter that I'm using. Okay, so I've done my pre-start setup for my systems on my diesel generator, and I prioritize that ahead of time from the cooling water system just to allow the preheater a little bit more time to start warming up my system. So it started around 20 degrees, and just with that time I've gained 15 degrees or so in my system. So it's going to warm up a little bit quicker with me prioritizing those preheaters anyways above the seawater cooling system. Okay, so let's get the seawater cooling system going here. So I have my seawater system number 1, and I can see I don't have any cooling water flow to this generator. So here I am at number 1, and I have a reservoir of water that I'm going to draw from. So I'm going to pick one of my inlets. So I have 2 inlets here. So I'm going to pick from one of them to use. I'm going to use my auxiliary pump. Just before I do that, I'm going to set up my pathway. So my pathway is going to come across. I'm going to open up my pathways to my diesel generator coolers. Then we're going to make our way to this control valve. And whenever I have a control valve, I always want to make sure that I'm sending water in all the possible directions. So I have a outlet that goes overboard, and then I also have a pathway that allows me to recirculate water. Okay, so with that set up, I think I can turn on my auxiliary pump, and I can confirm that I do have a good sufficient amount of water flowing through my coolers. And with that, I have my 3 sort of pre-start systems set up, and got my milestones for those for setting up the diesel generators. Okay, so next thing that I have to do is my diesel generator 1 and 2 need to be started and warmed up, and we'll go to 75 and 76 to do that. So I need to have at least 15 bar of pressure at my start air system, and looks like I do. So I'm able to put this into local and hit my start button. And this generator runs around 900 RPM, and so I'll watch to see that my generator stabilizes somewhere around 900 RPM. Okay, so it looks like it has stabilized. And I'll get a couple of alarms likely here, low temperature alarms, and that's okay, it's expected. We have a cold system, and it's just on the pathway to start warming up. So we expect to have a few low temperature alarms, so nothing to be worried about. I'll switch over to diesel generator number 2, and I'm going to repeat the process. Make sure it's in local, and then we're going to hit start and validate our operating speed. So it looks like I'm up around 900, and just like on the last one, I had a low temperature alarm that appeared. Again, the system is just starting to warm up and is still cold. Okay, so once this warms up, I should be able to get my check marks for these systems. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to start working at number 10. So now that I have these guys running, I can switch over to the electrical power plant, and I can start to get these up and connect it to the main bus bar. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is turn on my voltage control and adjust that value so that my voltage is around 440. Same thing with this generator, 440. And then I'm going to scan my frequencies. So I want these to be around 60. And I'm going to start with diesel generator 1. So I'm going to bring this down to around 60. In the meantime, while I was doing that, I noticed that I got my marks for the diesel generator 1 and 2 started and warmed up. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down to around 60. Okay, and once I'm down there, I can engage my diesel generator 1 and I can connect. Okay, I'm also going to connect in my second generator. I think it may not be the best choice operationally. We'll maybe talk about that in class when we get back. But anyway, this is the procedure that we're going to go through. We're going to connect in our second generator at this point. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring the frequency down so that it's a little bit above the generator that's currently connected. So 60.1 or so. Okay, so I'm slightly faster than this one. And if I switch to DG2, we're going to hit connect. Okay, sometimes it takes a few seconds, so we'll just be patient. And there we do now have our two generators connected. Okay. We want to be reasonably quick in this operation, which is to engage this breaker to supply electricity from my generators to my emergency bus bar. And so I'll engage that breaker. Okay, so what I've done is I've now taken my emergency bus bar and now powered it from my main generators. Okay, so my emergency generator has now disconnected, and because it's in auto, it will automatically shut itself down at some point. Okay, when I did that switch over, I didn't synchronize these generators, so there wasn't a synchronization in and out for the emergency system. What happened is I disconnected my power to both, and then I connected the generator I wanted. And what that meant is that I had a moment where I had no power. So step number 11 is we need to make sure any systems that might have been affected are turned back on. So when I look at my electrical panel, anything that has a 0 here may have turned itself off. So something like my auxiliary seawater pump, I generally rely on, and it shows 0 as the power output. There's a good chance that it stopped working. Okay, and in addition, if I do go and look at my seawater system, I did have a alarm that came up here. So alarm 13 has told me that I do have a problem with my seawater pressure. We can note that the auxiliary pump turned itself off, and turning that auxiliary pump back on will restore the cooling water flow to my diesel generators, as well as my pressure in my line. Okay. This wasn't the only thing that turned off on this system. We also had our emergency fire pump that we were using. It looks like it has turned off, so we'll want to make sure that we restore power to that. Okay, so with that scan of my electrical devices, I have accomplished my blackout scan. And then last thing that I want to do is finish up with my generators. So I would like, just like I did with my air compressor, so for instance, my emergency air compressor is going to be automated, so it reads the pressure and decides to turn on and off. I'd like my diesel generators to monitor their output and then decide to turn themselves on or off as needed. Okay, similar to what happened with the emergency generator. So in order to do that, I follow a similar process to my air compressors. On each of my diesel generators, I'll just clear that alarm. On each of my diesel generators, I'm going to switch them to remote. And then on my panel directory, page 101, I have diesel generator 1 and 2, and I can switch these guys into auto. And we'll put them into optimum load, which means it will find the most efficient use of its generators. And we can see that at this point, this generator has disconnected and sent all of the load to this generator. I've got my mark here. Okay. Sometimes it's this panel's a little harder to sort of see. If we jump back to number 70, just to point out what's happening, you've got your output that's 100% coming off of diesel generator 1. Diesel generator 2 has disconnected, and it will eventually turn itself off. The power output from this guy, 150 or so kilowatts of power, and it has a capacity of around 900 kilowatts, so it's operating at about 1/6 the capacity. So definitely has a lot of more electrical capacity to be able to supply to systems in my plant. So this guy is running, let's say, efficiently, and I only need one generator to supply the power to my plant. Okay, last thing is breakers on. So we have all of our breakers on 73. However, we also have 72 and 71 in order to turn on the breakers. So we have power to all of our systems. So we could just go through the pathway of turning these guys on. And we also have a transformer here to make sure we've engaged, and then complete the pathway down. Okay, and so with that, we should get our final milestone. And then if we wait for a few seconds, we should also see a pop-up with an all done message, and it should automatically save your assessment. And so with that completes your sort of cold ship to own supply startup portion. And hopefully you have success with your midterm. Okay, thanks.